Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody being here and your interest. And despite Angela's introduction, you may say, well, what does New Mexico have to do with nuclear waste and what does it have to do with Canada? So we don't have nuclear power plants in New Mexico, but we do have a lot of nuclear waste because the United States, of course, has a lot of nuclear bombs, nuclear weapons. And to produce those weapons created a lot of nuclear waste. What to do with it? Well, what was decided to do with it was to dig tunnels about 650 meters deep into salt formations to then bring the waste to this site, which is called WIPP, W-I-P-P, for Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. And because there are only 3 similar situations in the world, deep geologic repositories, hundreds of meters deep, all of which are that have operated for 10 years or more are in salt, 2 in Germany and the 1 in New Mexico. The thought is, well, somehow we should have learned something, and there are such a thing as Ontario Power Generation calls best international practices. They don't really define what best international practices might be, but they point to the site in my state in New Mexico as an example of the best practices. They don't like to talk about the 2 German sites as best practices, both of which operated for more than a decade back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Why not? Because those facilities didn't work at all. In fact, one, the Assa mine in Germany, the German government has now decided that everything that was put, all the waste that was put in the ground there, needs to be retrieved and pulled out of the ground because that facility didn't work. The Morsleben plant in Germany hasn't taken any more waste for a long time because it has problems as well. So that leaves the site in New Mexico, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which in theory should be working just fine. It's operated for 14 years now, and it is for nuclear weapons waste, but not high-level waste, the high radioactive waste that Kevin talked about from nuclear power plants, and in fact it wouldn't work at all for those situations. But one of the myths that, and part of what I'm going to talk about with the Commission, is there's this idea that we know enough to say there are stable geologic formations in the world that you could put a lot of nuclear waste in and it would stay there for a long time and not to worry about it. As I say, the history is that's none of the facilities have ever operated to handle all of the waste that they're supposed to handle, point 1. Point 2, none of them have then ever been sealed up to try to make sure that they won't leak out. And none of them have, therefore, we don't know how they're going to behave even for a few decades, let alone for the thousands of years that this would be a problem. So, contrary to what Angela says, is there an easy solution that I have or anybody else has? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We don't have a proven way of solving the waste problem. In theory, putting it deep in the ground makes the most sense. I frequently say there are 4 ways to deal with, there are 4 places you can put nuclear waste. You can leave it on the surface, which is generally what's done. You could dump it in the ocean, which is, of course, not in a planned way, but part of what's being done at Fukushima. That's not a good idea. You could put it in the air, shoot it into outer space. We in the United States that have had the Columbia disaster, for example, don't think it's totally impossible in terms of the cost of it, but You know, think about what an explosion of a rocket going into outer space would do to nuclear waste. So the theoretical basis then, the fourth idea, is find stable places and to put it underground. But, as I say, the history is we have to be very cautious about that because we don't know enough about whether it will work and how it works. And another thing that's disturbing to me, as somebody who has looked at this WIP site in New Mexico for a long time, is Ontario Power says, well, let's use some of the practices that work well at WIP. We call those best international practices. Well, one of the things they want to use is similar to WIP, where you put the waste underground in tunnels and then seal it up underground. Ontario Power says, well, let's use a similar technology to seal up the rooms there, if that site ever operates. And they point to what was approved 15 years ago, before WIP started operating, as the way those areas, the underground tunnels, would be sealed up. The practice is none of that technology that was proposed has actually been used at WIP, because in our case it's the Department of Energy, a federal government agency rather than the power company, has decided that the so-called best technology to seal it up so it's unlikely to leak out is not feasible to do. So here's an example of supposedly knowing what you're doing. You put the waste in the ground knowing how to seal them up, and now 15 years into the process we're saying, well, we don't really know how to seal it up in the underground. What are we going to do? So we're going to go through a process in the United States of trying to, well, now that we've got 80,000 cubic meters of waste underground, what are we going to do to try to seal it up? This becomes particularly important because when, just like you don't want to put nuclear waste in the ocean, you don't want to put nuclear waste into volcanoes or earthquake faults because it's likely to have problems. You don't want to put nuclear waste in a place that there could be a lot of drilling going on, mining activities. Well, guess what is totally surrounding the WIP site? Active oil and gas wells. There are proven oil and gas reserves underneath the WIP site. So even if the facility would work and could be sealed up, not right now, but long term, you have a lot of potential to be drilling holes and fracking, if any of you know what hydrofracking is, that could release the waste long term. So the bad news is we don't have proven good solutions, let alone for the higher radioactive waste that Kevin was talking about at power plants. We don't have good solutions for waste, putting it underground in ways that we think or have a great expectation that it is going to work. So it's not a solution. In fact, it's kind of a bummer to say we don't have a solution to this problem. But the fact of the matter is we don't. And so part of my concern about Canada moving forward quickly with a site is, are we in a hurry to put waste underground so that people may feel like it's safe, whether it is or not? Or do we really know enough about how to put waste in the ground, how the ground reacts when it's there, and how to safely seal it up so it won't come out? Unfortunately, we have no examples in the world of that succeeding, including the one that's supposed to be the best example in New Mexico. So that's a real downer, so it's great that we've had some music to lift us up. And I obviously can talk some more about the problems at my site, but the caution is Canada says, the U.S. talks about the precautionary principle. Let's be careful and know what we're doing and don't do things that are going to create more harm. Putting waste in the ground where it's even harder to control potentially doesn't seem like a very good solution. So I encourage Canadians and the folks looking at the Kincardine site to be pretty cautious before they decide that they really know enough to move forward with that facility. Thank you.